thinking that it was going to just harm your enemy and not turn on you. Some things that I want to point out, I know this is going long, but this is why I did this as a live stream, because there's just too much to talk about on this. But there have been a couple of public, national, international condemnations of China for this practice. There was 22 nations signed a letter condemning China for the camps and saying this was a human rights abuse and this was terrible. The countries that were involved on that list, I want to read to you the nations. So the 22 nations, you've got like Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom. So interestingly, the United States was not on that list, but this was a letter condemning China for their camps. Now, 4 days later, another group of countries came forward and said, we're actually going to defend what they're doing because they're trying to get rid of extremism. And those nations, you notice that the first group of nations are very Western. The other nations that were actually saying, you know what, China's got a point, were actually, many of them, Muslim majority nations. You have Algeria, Angola, Bahrain, Belarus, Bolivia, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cambodia, Cameroon, Comoros, Cuba, Dominican Republic of Congo, Egypt. Some of these I cannot pronounce, guys. This is embarrassing. Eritrea? Can you guys help me out with that one? Gabon, Kuwait, Laos, Myanmar, Nigeria, North Korea, Oman, Pakistan, Philippines, Qatar, Republic of Congo, Russia, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, interestingly, on the list, Saudi Arabia is the one who was exporting out Wahhabism. Although Saudi Arabia was sort of asked to export Wahhabism by the West. So yeah, they had it in their own country, but the reason it started really spreading around the world was because the West asked them to do it in order to help destabilize countries we didn't like China. Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, Tajikistan, Togo, Turkmenistan, United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. So you notice a big difference on the nations that actually said, you know what, you're doing the right thing. We're not going to condemn you. We're actually going to support you. You're trying to eradicate this extremism that is that you brought in. They didn't really infiltrate. You can't really say they infiltrated your country. China kind of created the problem on their own by inviting them in. Also, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Uyghur Act back in December. I believe the vote was 407 to 1. There was one lone, believe it was Representative Massey, was the lone rep who voted against the Uyghur Act. There were several who sat out, who did not vote, Tulsi Gabbard being one who did not vote on this, which I think is the right move. But the House passed the Uyghur Act, which called for sanctions on China until they stopped the camps. So when the U.S. House of Representatives passed that act, the Chinese Muslim Association came out in support of their government and said, mind your own business. Don't come after us. You don't know what's going on here. We'll decide what are human rights abuses against ourselves. Now, of course, you could always say, well, they were told to say that by the government, and if they didn't, they were afraid, and you can say a lot of things, but that's what happened. They came out in support of what was going on, saying, let the Uyghur people decide what the human rights abuses are. Now remember, 90%, even if there are really truly 10% of the Uyghurs in these camps, which they don't even know if that's the real number, that's actually a high estimate of 10%, that means 90% of the Uyghurs are out and about, free to live their lives, including free to practice Islam. They just can't practice Wahhabism. That is the line China has made. So recently, some reports came out saying that there were leaked documents from China, what they were looking for when they were detaining people. They're looking for people with the long beards. They're looking for the women that are fully veiled. They're looking for people who visit certain websites. They're looking for signs of Wahhabism. And if there are signs of Wahhabism around you, or if you're exerting signs of Wahhabism, then there is a chance you're going to end up in one of these re-education camps. So again, this isn't to say that China is blameless or even harmless in all of this, but we just need to understand what the situation actually is. They've got this rise in extremism that they helped bring in, They decided that they needed to do something about it because of all of the major terrorist attacks that were going on in their nation. They could have rounded all of them up and deported them. I don't know where. They can't really do that because these people are from there. They're not foreigners. These are people from China, born and raised in that region. And they did not choose to round up all of the Uyghurs. This is not some kind of a cultural genocide going on. That's not true. China is trying to get you to go visit. They want you to go check it out for yourself and go partake in the Uyghur culture throughout the entire region. So let's go over some of the counter arguments that I've been hearing all day on Twitter. I need to take a little drink. Hold on, sorry. This is going long, guys. This is like an hour. And this is really not very... It's not put together well. I'm actually quite tired from doing all of the research. I'm going to redo all of this in a more succinct video for you tomorrow. And I'm going to put it all together with the footage. I promise I'll get it out to you. And I'll put it in a better message that doesn't take 1 hour. I'll make this more succinct. But I just needed to do something today and to talk about this. And then I'll probably take this down and put out another one, a better one. Because this is a mess. This is a hot mess. I'm a hot mess. Okay. Some of the counter arguments. The stance at these camps are perhaps justified isn't a progressive stance. I get it. A lot of people saying to me, I am not progressive. This isn't a very progressive thought. My question is, what is a progressive way of handling extremism? And we're not talking, again, the random kid sitting in his parents' basement on 8chan. We are talking about potentially, if the number really is, let's say, 1 million, 10% of the Uyghurs have been radicalized. What would you do if 10% of your town had been radicalized into some weird, brainwashed sect of religion where they believe that you need to die? They'd sooner rather slit your throat than have a conversation with you. What would you do if 10% of that infiltrated your town? How would you combat it? What is the progressive answer? I think it is more progressive to try to re-educate them, to say, I don't think it's progressive to let them just continue on, because we've seen what's happened to Afghanistan. Afghanistan's a perfect example of what happens if it just continues. Suddenly, everybody's living under the Taliban. And women aren't free. Girls can't get educations past the age of 8. People are stoned to death. Heads are cut. I mean, allowing your community to get to the point where the Taliban has now taken over and they're now in control of your town and you now have to live under that. That to me is not the progressive stance. I'm not saying I have an answer to how to deal with a 10% radicalized population, but I could tell you that certain ideas are more humane than others. If you're going to have a prison, which we have in this country, we have a prison system. If you have a prison system, what do you want the inside of those prison systems to be like? How do you want those prisons to operate? If the option is not, don't have them, let the people go, that's not really the option. If the option is you have to have the prison, then you'd want the prison to truly be educating the people, giving them hope, skills, education, right? You'd want that. Even though they're trapped there, that's what you'd want the inside of those prisons to be. So that's what China claims they're doing. That's what they claim they're doing. We don't really know. Another criticism, the way to breed extremists is to throw them in these camps and create resentment. Yeah, that is true. This is sort of a chicken and egg situation. Why did so many of the Uyghurs become radicalized to begin with? Well, because they probably felt oppressed. They probably felt a lack of opportunity. They probably felt poor. They probably felt like they didn't have a future. And so they were easier to turn to a radical form of Islam that would teach them that the afterlife has something really special in store for them, especially if they go and commit acts of jihad. So it is sort of a chicken and egg situation. And of course, the way to prevent extremism would be to educate people, give them hope, give them opportunities, right? That would be a way to prevent extremism. But when they've already become radicalized, it becomes a lot more challenging. People that are radicalized are not going to voluntarily go and be re-educated. They would view that as brainwashing, because it is. It's like a form of maybe positive, but it's still a brainwashing. So they're not going to go and voluntarily go and do that. So this becomes really sort of challenging. Another criticism, but it is true that putting extremists in camps is creating more extremists, but also marching in and blowing them up is creating more extremists. I don't know how you're going to, I don't know what you can do once